to a software showcase. I'm your host, Mark Stedman, and joining me in the studio today, as always, is Glenn Oliver, our team's project manager and all-around great guy. Glenn, it's really good to see you.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Here in
The Bungalow.
The Bungalow, broadcasting live from the campus of Wycliffe Associates in sunny Orlando, Florida. Speaking of, it has been very sunny. Just a little weather update from Central Florida. I know that's probably shocking for our people watching online, but it has been sunny and warm, really nice weather.
People tell me summer's still coming. It feels like it's already here.
Yeah, it's still on the way. It's going to get warmer.
Oh, joy.
So Glenn, what are we doing today?
Well, today we have an opportunity to meet with Roger Wertenberger. Now, Roger actually probably one of the few guests that doesn't work directly in our department, but I seem to be working with every day. Love working with the guy. And we want to kind of talk about some of the good work that he and his team do in oral Bible translation, how they're able to support that for us.
Well, you know I love to talk about oral Bible translation, one of my favorite topics, so I appreciate the opportunity to do that and actually pull back the covers a little bit on some parts of oral Bible translation that most people probably haven't thought about.
True. And although we'll be trying to define our terms and talk about the big picture of audio, if you have any questions along the way, make sure to put that into the Q&A channel, and we'll try to address that at the end.
That's right. Or even as we go, if they're really good questions. Craig will wave at us and stop us.
And make sure to stick around to the end for bullet time.
That's right. That's right. So I think we discussed starting at the end and working our way backwards. Is that still the plan?
It is. Kind of our first question here, we'll bring Roger into the conversation, but I think we want to paint a big picture.
That's right.
And that's kind of the question of why is oral languages or oral Bible translation a focus for us?
Would you like me to answer?
Yeah, actually.
Yeah. Okay, the reason that oral Bible translation is a focus for us is because billions and billions of people around the globe are oral preference learners. Now, do you know what an oral preference learner is?
Well, I know my wife would rather listen to a book than read a book.
That's right. In fact, it's not just people in the developing world that are oral preference learners. I would say anybody who would prefer an audiobook, people who enjoy, for instance, podcasts. Myself, I listen to lots and lots of podcasts. I probably spend far more hours each week listening to podcasts than I do reading books, much to the chagrin of my high school English teacher. I enjoy reading books, but I also really enjoy hearing stories told to me. So that is an oral preference. I prefer to learn by hearing it audibly. And for many cultures around the world, as we've talked about in the past, that is a very strong preference. In fact, so strong, their languages don't have a written alphabet. They don't really value writing. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody around the world who's an oral preference learner is illiterate. I'm not illiterate, and neither is your wife. I just prefer to learn that way. And globally, many people can read in a language of wider communication, but their heart language is either not written or it's not written well, and so they prefer to learn orally. And recognizing that, Wycliffe Associates really has seen the need for oral Bible translation, and we've been working in this space for more than 6 years now in terms of developing tools.
Well, let's pick up on that thread for just a moment, too. So I think people have a picture, if you will, about how Bible translation may work. I mean, maybe it's a monk and a scroll or whatnot, but they get right. The idea that somebody is kind of transcribing. But when we talk about an oral language or even an oral preference, I mean, how does that work?
You know, it's interesting. It's very different, obviously, than written Bible translation, and yet it's not so different. You need to have a starting text to begin translating from. And in our case, we would call that a gateway language or a language of wider communication. We've identified about 30-some languages of wider communication, and they make it onto the list because they are languages that globally you can almost always find somebody who's bilingual. Even in that remote heart language, they're bilingual into one of these languages of wider communication because, of course, the world gets smaller every day. It's very, very difficult for somebody to live in such an isolated way that they only have to speak that heart language. That's the only contact that they have. They're very likely to have opportunities to interface with people who speak one of these languages of wider communication. So, surveying the globe and people a lot smarter than me, linguists and whatnot, have figured out, okay, there's about 30-odd languages that are these languages of wider communication. And a lot of them are the usual suspects: English, Spanish, French, Arabic, and so forth, Chinese. So you've got to have that starting source text in one of these languages of wider communication so that your mother tongue Bible translator can listen to that scripture and have a basis to to start their scripture translation from.
Great. And actually, I brought a couple examples of how that source translation, that gateway source, can be used. We've talked about projects like Bible Translation Tools Recorder, or sometimes known as BTT Recorder. And I've used our own audio spec, BibleTranslationTools.org, to download right directly to this tablet source audio, so somebody could start listening to it. Now, for our convenience, I chose English, and because I've downloaded it from there.
The elder to beloved Gaius, whom I love in truth.
So that just happens to be a particular verse, but now it's in the software, and somebody could be able to listen to that as many times as they want, using mass methodology to think about it in their head and then speak it back as they start drafting how that would translate in their own language.
Yeah.
So we can use that with some of our own software, or some of the end result can be used. We use it as MP3s. I could play it on my phone or on other compatible devices. So this, for example, is Mega Voice, which you want to talk a little bit about a relationship with them, but I'll show here that we've got a device that has the ability to go through the various chapters, the verses, whatever you need to play, and so I can.
The daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. They were both righteous.
So I can preload any number of languages on there. Here's another language, for example. And I can use that as my source that I'm listening to as I start doing the translation or transcribing, however you want to use that as your source. And some of these models even have a record button, so I could listen to it, and I can even use the record right on the device itself.
Yeah, and these are a particularly nifty device because on the back it has a solar panel, so you actually don't have to have a charger for these. But let's talk a little bit about how that content got generated. So in the case of what you showed in BTT Recorder, and both on these Mega Voice units, those were gateway languages or languages of wider communication. You showed English, and I believe you said it was Nepali for the other one.
Yep.
So the way that those get created is we would call that a narration project. So we take the written scripture and we have either volunteers or somebody who has some recording, good recording voice. We actually have them narrate the chapters of scripture, and we chop those up so that in the software you can navigate from verse to verse and so forth. So we create those through narration. Then we have that source text, if you will, that the translator can listen to, as you showed for Recorder. And then they can begin the process of recording their own heart language.
Why, that sounds so easy.
It is easy in theory.
So let's actually meet with Roger and pick up that part of the story as well.
Yeah.
Roger, good afternoon. Thanks for coming to the showcase.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Roger, great to see you.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.
Before we get started answering that question about that transition from the narration of audio to how it gets to our system, can you kind of introduce yourself to our audience a little bit? Give us a little bit of your background and how you came to WA.
Sure. I became familiar with WA before I was born, actually, because my father was one of his Army buddies became a Wycliffe Bible translator. And through the years, as Wycliffe Associates was created, he did volunteer and support work through them for before I could remember it. And he and my mom and my stepmom both have been volunteers both in Orlando and in Texas and JARS and in Arizona. And so once I retired, my wife, Cheryl, we decided we'd like to continue that process. And besides, we have kids in Texas, so we go to Texas for the month of December, and it gets too cold in January. So about 5 years ago, we decided to come over to Orlando and have enjoyed it immensely there. And we spend 3 to 4 months in the wintertime there because we don't like the cold snow that we have up here in Nebraska. And so that's how we got started and been doing it. And the first year we came there, we got a tour showing what the different jobs were that we could do as volunteers, and Glenn and a whole bunch of people were sitting in a conference room talking to these computers. So I said, well, I've used computers in my work as a maintenance manager and are familiar with how to use them, and so, yeah, I'd be glad to sit in there and joined the crew. And Glenn latched onto my computer abilities, which has nothing to do with programming, just a user, and started having moving files around of all these people doing recordings on tablets and computers, and so I started helping with the audio files that way.
That's such a great example of the transitions that have happened in Wycliffe Associates in the last 10 years. When I started in 2010, the Winter Volunteer Corps was really focused on like campus maintenance kinds of stuff. And that's great, so useful, so valuable to have folks come down and trim trees and clean stuff and paint and all those things, really wonderful. But I think 5 or 6 years ago, we really started to ask the question of, hey, how can we use some of these volunteers who actually have some skills that aren't necessarily oriented toward the physical plant, but could actually be engaged in some of these tasks that are really front and center for Bible translation. And so Roger's a great example of kind of this new generation of volunteers who are really actively engaged in more of the technical work, using those kinds of skills. And it's really touching Bible translation in a very direct way. I always get a kick out of those sample files because, of course, both of those English ones were recorded by some of our other volunteers.
That's correct.
One of them, I think, was Randy Stouter.
Yep.
And the other, I'm not fully sure who it was, but I know I recognize the voice. It was a lady.
Yes.
Elaine.
Elaine, yes, thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, so these are just examples of the kinds of things that you could do if you came on campus in the wintertime. You might not just be doing, like outdoor kinds of stuff. You could actually be doing things like this that are really helping advance Bible translation directly.
Yep, and they all deserve a credit in, if you can imagine, on half of our software titles, they all deserve, almost like producer roles, because we wouldn't have had any of these without their help.
Yeah, for sure.
But Roger's special because I put extra loads on his shoulders for that. And one of them, which is this concept that we have as audio librarian.
Yeah.
So where we left off is we have all of this source material, and we need to be able to get it to a point where we can disseminate it to all this software, these devices, or our programs. And all of them want them in some sort of different format. So Roger, I'll ask the question. So all this audio that's coming, first, tell me all the different sources that we find audio for our GL, Gateway Languages.
Well, the two examples you showed with Randy and Elaine started out on tablets. And so that file had to get from the tablet to somewhere else. So most of those, me and a few others, actually took the SD cards out of the tablets and put them on a computer and put them onto a Citrix server. And the other places we get them, sometimes there's other partners who have recording studios, and they've done them. I think the Nepali one that we listened to there was one of those examples where they've just had a whole set of files, and they've gotten them to us in various ways, emails. They can put them on Citrix server from anywhere in the world. And then you have several teams, I believe, also doing some testing with the new program Orature. And so those files also, basically they all go through the Citrix server, but then that's not an easy to handle computer filing system. And so we've done various other things, and sometimes those files have music in the background, or sometimes they've at the beginning of each chapter they've said chapter 1, chapter 2, and our sources don't want those kinds of things, and so me and the team have gone in and manipulated those files so that to delete, we've actually cut out of the audio that word chapter 1, and sometimes it's not in English, so we find other volunteers that speak whatever language it is, such as Hindi, and help us. Yes, that is the word 1, and so forth. And so once we're sure what the voice waves look like, then we can chop those out and have just what we want in order to put up onto the new server that's available on Bible in every language.
Right. So, yeah, I think you outlined some of the challenges almost every language we encounter, there's something there that Roger's team is like, hey, this is strange. And we have a new problem. We have to figure out how to do that. And we've had, again, volunteers come to our aid. I know when we had the Hindi, and as Roger mentioned, we don't speak Hindi, and so we were provided with these great files, but we didn't know where they began or end with chapters or verses. And so we had people come in, specifically, I think you introduced us to one of them, who listened to all of that and inserted that for us. It was a tremendous help. And we also have, as Roger mentioned, sometimes the files don't necessarily come in the format that we're expecting.
Right.
And so there has to be some massaging. So Roger's picked up a number of skills in order to be able to maneuver that.
Just a couple of things there before you go on. One is, I think what you're hearing is our own process of evolving. You know, when we started working on Oral Bible Translation in about 2015, we had no idea what we were doing. We just got some ideas from some folks and started building some software. And then as we realized, we're going to need these languages to be narrated, we were like, go and do it. And people started doing it, and we didn't really know what to ask for. And so that, I think, was so much of why some of the earliest languages, you know, like you said, they came in with background music. We didn't tell them not to put in background music, and they liked it. But for our use, it wasn't good. So we've learned lessons along the way. We've evolved, and in fact, our tools have evolved. Certainly I hope that in the coming years, many of these problems won't occur because we're giving folks who are doing these narrated projects, we're giving them the tools to actually produce the files the way that we want them. But also the story of how that particular volunteer came in is so good because she had actually reached out to one of our job postings and said, you know, I did some software, 20 years ago, and then I've taken 20 years off to be a stay-at-home mom, I believe. And she said, I'd really like to do something with Bible translation. And I talked to her on the phone. She had just a great heart, but not quite the right fit for what we were looking for. But in the course of that conversation, she mentions that she's at least trilingual. I can't even remember. She spoke English and a couple of other languages from India. And I went, well, okay, I don't think I can hire you onto the team for the job that we're hiring for. However, how would you feel about doing this? And I handed her off to you, and here you go, at least a year later now, 2 years later, she's a valuable part of the team, and it was just such a testimony to how the Lord brings people into the flow of the work that we're doing to answer a question that we only barely understood that we even had. Like, wait a minute, you speak, I think, like Tamil and Hindi or something. Like, yeah, I think you actually could help us out. That would be great. So anyway, that's just such a neat story that I just like to tell.
Yeah. And Rogers and his team continue to not only help us work out the software by, we come up with maybe a way to record things or organize things or manage things, and they're some of the first actual users that are showing us, is this the best way to do it?
Right.
But if you ever heard like how roads come to being, at least in New England, I can tell you, you pretty well figure out, oh, they built this road following a cow path, didn't they?
Right.
They just beat that there. And sometimes some of the tools that we create are because Roger and his team have figured out this is the process that we get from A to B, and then we come along and decide how can we help? And Roger goes, aha, yeah, I know exactly what you need. Yeah. And so we are able to build a series of tools to be able to do that. I don't know if you want to mention any of those tools by name, but the process is a little bit interesting, and I think I'll just summarize, and you can add color if you want to. But when Roger actually has a candidate saying, hey, cool, I now have the Book of Ruth. And so he's got all these files ready to go. Well, our system is designed to take all of those files, all the individual verses or chapters or what have you, and make sense of them. And Roger has to go in there as a librarian and basically correct it because the software is trying to help, but it's sometimes guess is wrong. And so Roger corrects all that with a pass of that, and then basically he's reading it from the system. And then that all goes up there. And Roger and his team are keeping an eye on that. It reports back to him, here's what I did. And he knows if there's a problem, and they unstick the cogs so it can keep moving. And then the system itself will start generating all the different permutations. So one nice thing is Roger, for the most part, just has to upload files once, and it creates all the files for all the different systems. Yeah. It's kind of fun watching it come together.
Yeah, and speaking of files for the systems, just for people who are interested, so we primarily at this time are primarily recording in WAV. Which of course is large, not really designed to be downloaded or things like that, but it keeps the quality up. So then when all that stuff gets put into the server, The server is then basically putting it into MP3s that are smaller and can be downloaded. It's doing things like taking all the verse files and compiling them into chapters, I believe, or taking a chapter file and turning it into verse files.
Both are true.
Yeah.
It does both.
So whatever it's missing, it fills in the rest of the gaps so that it's able to have all of the content that a translator would need. And a lot of that stuff is sort of background processes that our programmers have put together that process through all that stuff. But you cannot underestimate the amount of help that Roger and his team are. And as much as we would love to see this whole thing just be some kind of an automated system, it just isn't. There's just too many steps to it for it to be completely automated. And so that librarian function is just like a library. You know, the biggest libraries in the world still have librarians who make decisions about content, make sure it's all shelved correctly and all those kinds of things. So yeah, thanks, Roger.
Yeah, so Roger's
like
actually part of that content team. Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, I'd like to latch on to that comment that Mark just said about your programmers, because they are a magnificent team in themselves, and I believe the two of you are part of it and lead that team. But a year ago, you mentioned that the server makes all the MP3 files and so forth. That wasn't true a year ago.
That's right.
A year ago, me and my team took the WAV files, put them through some of the software that Glenn was talking about in order to make the source audios and the MP3s, and even before that, we didn't even have software that made the source audios. We had to go to a tablet, put an SD card in it with the WAV files on it, make source audios, and take it back out, and then put it on the server.
Yeah.
And so to do the book of Ruth might have taken 2 days. But now, with the tools that the programming team has put together on the server, I upload a chapter file server, and the computer whips through, and it takes me 5 minutes to put it up there, and the server does all the rest of the work. So it's fantastic what your programmers have done.
Well, and it's good news too, because let's talk about the future a little bit. So right now, do you know the count of about how many complete GL narrations we have, so Old and New Testament?
That's actually a better Roger question than
Okay,
me.
Roger, do you know how many languages have both the New and Old Testament? I think I know the answer, but...
As far as both New and Old, I think there's only one, English.
That's what I thought.
But but we've got parts, complete New Testaments from at least 2 others, I believe, and parts of each in about 6 languages.
That's right. So we're definitely on the front end of generating all of this content, about 30, 34 languages, something like that. I should know that number off the top of my head, but
I think it's 38 maybe?
Maybe, yeah. Quite a few more than we have now. We'll talk a little bit about a couple languages that are getting worked on in Indonesia and India right now with a couple of our partner organizations that are doing those recordings for us. But bottom line is there's a lot of work that's kind of on the horizon that's incoming. And so, the just-in-time software development philosophy says, okay, let's not solve the problem until it's here. Okay, it's here, let's solve the problem. And so that's why it was manual for a long time, because so much of it was really prototyping. It was us figuring out, what are we going to need? What is the software going to need? What's the best way to solve these problems? And so we've got a sense of that now, so that's why we've got so many automated processes. But there's quite a bit of work to be done. We have a plan for doing it. It's good timing that a lot of it is getting more automated.
Yep. And we're hoping to see more and more partners start contributing, because that's going to be a key, and for us being able to hand this off to the church to start doing their own oral scriptural translations.
That's right, yeah. So the 2 languages that are getting worked on by our partners are Indonesian. They're narrating a version of the Indonesian Bible called AYT. And then the one that's getting worked on in India, I believe, is Oriya. And those are our friends, and they're actually doing those in Orature, which we don't want to say too much about Orature because I believe we have a software showcase upcoming.
Yeah, you mentioned prototype, and we'll actually probably be showing some of the prototype we've got for some new MAST features that people have not seen before.
Yeah, that's coming up in a few weeks, I think, maybe 1 or 2 down the line. But yeah, Orature is our new oral Bible translation tool based on everything we learned by building Recorder for the tablet. Now we've built a desktop version, complete ground-up re-architecture. Pretty excited about that, but that'll be featured soon.
Good.
So, what else have you got for Roger?
Well, first, do we have any questions coming from our audience?
We do. Hey, everybody.
Hey, Craig.
So it's actually not a question. It's from Christine Jarka. She says, Roger is a hero.
Yep.
And I wanted to just add a note. Working on the software development team, Mark mentioned that we don't try to solve problems before we encounter them. And one of the reasons for that is that we don't often know the right way to fix it until we've worked through it a few times. Right. It can be a temptation in software to sort of say, well, we've got these amazing machines. Let's build something that solves the problem we think it is, and then we build it and find out it's the wrong solution.
Right.
So the pain that the team went through in converting those files, thank you very much for that, Roger, because you taught us what we needed to do in order to automate it for you. So it was great working together on that.
Yeah, not just a shout out to Roger's content team, but also a shout out to the many volunteers that you have worked with who helped us develop and design this software by testing it all winter. They were fantastic about helping us find the places where, this doesn't work well, or this works great, but it needs this as well. So we used to say, we don't have a lot of people who are, developing world, oral preference learning, mother tongue Bible translators. We don't have a lot of those. So what do we have as a proxy for somebody who's, doesn't use technology a lot, maybe even a little bit technology averse or a little bit technology scared, willing to do the work and whatnot, but not that comfortable with it? What have we got? Well, we have a whole core of people who come down here every winter who fit that bill.
Absolutely.
So the closest proxy that we had was our retired winter volunteer corps. And they were great. They have been so helpful for us.
I'm glad that COVID is winding down, perhaps, for the U.S. I would love to. I always look forward to the winter season, and sad when they leave.
Yeah.
But yeah, and for the most part, that has been one of the wonderful things is, people who return to the programs, always love seeing them, and also people that think, I don't really have much experience. Can I contribute? And right away, I'm like, yes, actually, that's what I'm looking for. The person that's never encountered software like this before. What do you think it's going to do? How does it react? And that tells us so much.
It's so incredibly valuable to us. So, we're grateful for all the people that have been a part of this work.
Yeah.
Were there other questions, Greg? Okay.
I think it's that time.
I think it's that time too, Glenn.
All right.
What time is it?
It's bullet time.
It's bullet time. That's right. So, Roger, we hope you're ready for bullet time. Glenn is actually presenting the questions this time.
Yes. All right, Roger. What is the best sandwich?
The best sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
Culver's Butterburger.
Ooh.
Cheeseburger.
Very cool. Culver's Butterburger.
No,
okay.
I heard.
All
I was just thinking it through. Yeah, I think it's definitely on. It's in the mix.
Okay. Good. All right. Easy one. Cat, dog.
Neither.
Oh, not a pet guy.
Oh.
Not a pet guy. All right.
All right.
Okay. I use the excuse I have allergies.
There you go.
Your favorite decade?
This one.
Oh.
I like it. He's present.
Wow.
That's
okay.
right. Way to be where you are. That's
He's
right.
thrown us almost every time. I'm almost afraid to ask the next question, which is,
bring it on.
What is your book recommendation for us?
My book recommendation. Well, I don't do a lot of reading, but I have a few friends that do quite a bit, and they have actually, I just picked one up yesterday that was recommended to me. All the Gallant Men, the first memoir by a USS Arizona survivor, Donald Stratton.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I've gotten so far as the first chapter, but in the foreword, he says why he wrote this book. I wanted to save from the fire something of my memories of the Arizona, so that the younger generations and all of the children to come after them can understand why Pearl Harbor matters. And he's doing a wonderful job of doing that, I believe.
Great.
Good
So
stuff.
I'd highly recommend it.
Good stuff. Thanks,
Probably
Roger.
a big fan of Tom Hanks as well.
Probably.
Yeah,
Probably.
from what I know.
Yeah.
All right, fantastic. So let's just talk briefly about next time. I believe we're going to ask Craig to abdicate his seat and actually come up here to the table.
Yep.
And talk to us about writers. So we've been talking about software development, And we've seen recently a lot of little changes to Writer.
Oh, yeah.
And we've been actually getting some good feedback from the field. I think
Yeah.
they enjoy that. So we'd like to bring that up and show some updates from that.
Yeah, some really good updates coming. So we'll have probably our associate producer, Thomas Heine, behind the camera. But we'll see.
Excellent.
Maybe it'll be me. I always threaten maybe it'll be me. So we'll see.
Very good.
Yeah, well, just a special thank you to Roger for being in here, taking time out, and especially thank you for all the work that you do. I know Christine said you're great, but I also think you're great too, Roger. So thank you so much for being a part of the effort. Roger also continues to work even when he's not here, which I also appreciate. It's great. Some volunteers come and they go home and they serve while they're here, but I get the sense from Roger that he works basically all the time.
Yeah, I think they've had to try to put a limit on his time, and he said, what limit?
So thank you very much, Roger, for all of your hard work. And Glenn, as always, it's a pleasure.
Oh, it is an honor.
Yeah, see you back here in a couple of weeks.
All right, thanks all.